The Las Vegas Raiders have done their due diligence. They have met with pretty much all of the top QBs in the NFL draft and are planning to meet with the rest of them by the end of the week. But what does it mean that the Raiders have decided to meet twice with the consensus #1 pick in the NFL draft? Do the Raiders anticipate something that the rest of the league is sleeping on? We know every single year in the NFL draft, there are tons of surprises. And it seems like the Raiders think that there may be one surprise that is a possibility that could substantially benefit their team for years to come. Before we get into this video, guys, make sure you subscribe so we can reach more Raiders fans like you. Alabama QB Bryce Young seems to be a QB that not everybody is sold on. It is no doubt that this guy's size is a problem. This is something that people have talked about non-stop. The fact that he may be even shorter than Kyler Murray. Apparently, Bryce Young is 5'10", but there are reports that before the NFL Combine, he was weighing in at less than 200 pounds. People even joked around about the fact that maybe he was wearing some boosted shoes to make him a little bit taller at the NFL Combine. But we've seen shorter quarterbacks have success in the NFL before, whether it be Drew Brees, right? This guy was a shorter guy, but a very accurate passer. And we've seen people like Russell Wilson and Kyler Murray end up being successful in the NFL, even though their size is roughly the same as Bryce Young. So you have, Russell Wilson entering the league at 5'11", 204 pounds. Kyler Murray entering the league at 5'10", 207 pounds. And then you have Bryce Young pretty much at 5'10", 200 pounds at this point. So Bryce Young would be one of the shortest and smallest QBs in the NFL if he was drafted by a team. And it's crazy to think that many people are anticipating that this guy could go #1 or #2. And this predicament is giving NFL teams a headache. There are teams that are just not knowing what to do about Bryce Young. They're scared about drafting the guy. It could be a death sentence if his size is an issue at the NFL level. But at the college level, playing for one of the most prestigious college football teams, the Alabama Crimson Tide, Bryce Young has proven that he could do it at the highest level of college football. If there is anybody who could maybe have the Patrick Mahomes style play, be that guy who could improvise, make amazing plays, and use his athleticism to get out of tricky situations, and also be an accurate passer who could digest and go through his reads and make the right decision with the football, Bryce Young is that guy. And because of his amazing skill set, this is why he is considered a top pick in this upcoming draft, despite the fact that he has these unprecedented size issues. Bryce Young is actually the first Alabama quarterback to win the Heisman Trophy, the first ever. And he is the only quarterback in Alabama school history to throw for 3,000 plus yards in 2 seasons. He is the only guy who has done that with Alabama. And this is kind of interesting if you're a Raiders fan, because Josh McDaniels ended up being part of the crew that drafted an Alabama QB, mainly Mac Jones. So if Josh McDaniels likes the way that Nick Saban tends to raise his quarterbacks, if he liked his experience with Mac Jones, well, if you're looking at Bryce Young, this is a guy who's done better than Mac Jones in almost every single category. Bryce Young also has the most passing yards and touchdowns by an Alabama QB in their starting debut, and in 2021 he set the school's single season marks for passing yards at 4,872. What's crazy is despite all these accomplishments, many people could actually envision Bryce Young slipping in the draft. If you were a franchise like the Panthers, like the Colts, like the Texans, a franchise that needs to fix a couple problems around your football team before you just go off and try to make a Super Bowl run, and maybe you're not a quarterback away from making a Super Bowl run, you might be skeptical of drafting somebody like Bryce Young, somebody whose size might not translate to the NFL. And it's weird that we have not heard much buzz that the Texans are planning on drafting Bryce Young. We know, Bryce Young did not participate in the Combine, but that did not hurt his draft stock at all. And for that reason, it seems like many people are just assuming the Texans would pick him up because they need a quarterback. They just have Davis Mills. But we don't know what these people really think. And what if they're not really interested in drafting Bryce Young because they don't want to gamble on the guy? And the Raiders have put themselves in a great position. They've put themselves in a position where they can make any decision they want, and they even have the ability to let a quarterback rest for a little while, maybe let a quarterback gain some weight like Bryce Young, let him lift some weights with Juice Gruden and see how that goes. And that is why the Raiders have met with pretty much every quarterback, and they plan to meet with every quarterback. They met with Will Levis already. Hendon Hooker is going to arrive this week, CJ Stroud next week, and then they also are going to meet with Anthony Richardson on Friday, and they're meeting with Alabama quarterback Bryce Young today. And not only are they meeting with Bryce Young today, not only are they wasting one of their top 30 visits to talk to this quarterback up close and personal and intimate, have this guy visit the facility, well, they also met and talked with the guy at his pro day. And this is Mike Garofalo pointing this out, that after meeting him in Tuscaloosa, sorry if I mispronounced that, the Raiders are going to chat with Bryce Young again. And it seems like the Raiders are preparing for a situation and maybe think that is possible. There's two things that could be happening right now. Either the Raiders think that it is seriously possible that Bryce Young falls. If he falls out of maybe that number 1 or number 2 spot, maybe the Panthers go ahead and take CJ Stroud, maybe the Texans trade back, pass on a quarterback, or maybe somebody likes Anthony Richardson or Will Levis even more than Bryce Young. And I know that sounds crazy, but it is possible if they really do think the size problem is ultimately going to be an issue, and they are a franchise that does not have the luxury to gamble right now. So the Raiders are either anticipating that he is going to fall, or they think he is only going to fall a little bit. Maybe he falls to pick number 3, and the Raiders could pull the trigger on a trade with the Arizona Cardinals to select Bryce Young if he does fall to pick number 3 on the night of the draft. And the contract for backup quarterback Brian Hoyer has officially come out. And look, Brian Hoyer's not going to take Jimmy Garoppolo's job, right? But it is interesting that the Raiders went ahead and signed this guy to a 2-year deal. Not only did they sign Brian Hoyer to a 2-year deal, but it actually is, pretty much fully guaranteed, 93% fully guaranteed, $4.2 million contract. This is the most money that Josh McDaniels has paid for a backup QB since he's joined the Raiders so far. We know he traded for Jarrett Stidham, let him ultimately walk and test free agency, and he was ultimately picked up by the Denver Broncos. But it seems like Josh McDaniels went out of his way to go ahead and grab Brian Hoyer, and I think maybe he's preparing for a situation where Brian Hoyer might have to be the number 2 guy, especially if Jimmy Garoppolo gets hurt, or if Jimmy Garoppolo gets upset that the Raiders maybe trade up to pick number 3 to get Bryce Young, or just, it could be possible that the Raiders only have to trade up to pick 5 with the Seahawks to get Bryce Young. So maybe the Raiders are preparing, and I made a video about this, and I think a lot of people are confused about what exactly I was trying to say. What I am trying to say is I believe Josh McDaniels is not only getting a guy who's going to be good in the QB room, Brian Hoyer, a guy who knows the scheme, could teach it to people, and a guy who could be, a pretty good scout quarterback too. Not only are they getting that guy, but they're also creating the infrastructure and preparing for Jimmy Garoppolo to get pissed off or injured. That's what I think, because if they pick Bryce Young, or if they trade up to pick a quarterback, maybe Jimmy Garoppolo didn't know that was exactly the plan. Obviously, if the Raiders pick a quarterback in the top 10, the clock is ticking as to when that guy starts. Could even be mid-season, right? That is going to happen, and Jimmy Garoppolo's shelf life as the Raiders QB dramatically decreases. So maybe he'll be upset, maybe he'll check out. If it turns out that the Raiders are going to go with somebody else and he's not really in the picture long-term past this season as the quarterback for the Raiders. So, it's possible that Jimmy Garoppolo is a team player. He was cool about the Trey Lance situation, even restructured his contract after Trey Lance was injured and ended up being, basically the quarterback for the Niners. We'll see what happens. But I think the Raiders are preparing, and I think it is totally possible that Bryce Young does fall and the Raiders ultimately pull the trigger and grab a guy who is talented. The main question is, how is he going to do when the pocket collapses? Can he see over certain bodies? Can he make the throws over the middle of the field? And I think he's demonstrated that he can. And he also has an amazing ability to run with the football and also avoid hits. That's one of the strengths of Bryce Young. And I honestly think this guy would be amazing if he did fall to the Raiders. And I do believe it's great that the Raiders are preparing for this situation, because I do think it is likely that maybe these teams that are picking in the top 3, top 5, maybe they're not entirely sold on Bryce Young. Maybe they're too scared to pull the trigger on the guy. We've seen how Kyler Murray worked out. Russell Wilson's having problems now. Who knows? And ultimately, the Raiders need a game changer at quarterback. If they just roll with Jimmy Garoppolo, I think we're headed towards mediocrity. By the way, man, subscribe to this channel if you want more Raiders content. Check out some of these videos that we have if you may have missed them. My name is WiFiWillie. Peace out, and I hope you have a good one.